I had to get out of my lease because of the crisis. I was thinking that you may have the same problem too, so I wanted to show you how to get out of your home lease the right way, the legal way. Hey creator, I'm Ian Corzine, your social media lawyer. I'm on a crusade to help creators like you understand the law, and I want to protect your artistic freedom on social media. Today we're talking about leases. You know, way back when, before this crisis, we entered into leases. A lot of us thought we could pay the leases and have no problem, but some of us have lost our jobs and we're running out of money and we don't know what to do. We don't know how to make that next lease payment, and so we've got to get out of the lease the right way, but we want to be fair also to the landlord. I'm like you. I got in a situation where I couldn't afford my lease payments and I needed to get out of the lease. So I took a 3-step process that I created, and I was able to work with the landlord to get out of my lease and not have to make those payments. In this video, I'm going to show you that 3-step process, so maybe you can follow these steps and get out of your own lease so that you can kind of reconsider your financial situation, maybe cut costs. Step number 1 is to read your lease. If you do not have a copy of your lease, you should email your landlord and ask for a copy. When you get it, you should look at the terms of the lease. Specifically, you should look at a term called breach of contract early termination. Generally, what this clause says is that if you want to leave the lease, you want to break the lease and you want to leave your home early, then you're going to owe all the rent you would have had to pay to the landlord, even though you're leaving early. Also, these provisions usually require that you pay any costs that the landlord is going to have to expend to release that property. These clauses also usually contain a provision which says that the landlord can keep your security deposit to guard against those costs he's going to have when he releases the premises. I had a similar provision in my lease. You know, I didn't want to pay these costs, the remaining rent and the costs that the landlord was going to expend on maybe agency commissions or advertising. I didn't want to pay those things, but I knew from reading my lease that I was legally obligated to pay these to the landlord. So I approached the situation with modesty. I understood that the landlord did not have to make a separate deal with me, and that once I understood that set me up for a good negotiation. The only way to get out of a lease that's been signed and delivered and dated is to be able to enter into a separate agreement with the landlord. And one of your key issues when you're dealing with this is to figure out what your landlord's interest is. What value can you offer your landlord to get him, to convince him to do a different agreement than the lease you already agreed upon. So you have to be humble when you're considering breaking a lease, leaving it early. You know, the landlord is already entitled to certain payments for you, so you should be thankful that he or she is even willing to consider an alternative arrangement. So step number 2 is to figure out what value you can offer the landlord to entice him to let you out of the lease early. In my case, I knew that the landlord's main concern is he wanted a quiet tenant who paid his rent on time. So I went back to the lease. I went to the provision that talked about assignment and subletting. You probably have a similar provision in your lease. It basically says that the tenant cannot release the premises without the landlord's consent. However, most of these clauses also contemplate that the tenant can release the premises so long as the landlord approves. So I decided to take advantage of this clause. I found a friend who needed a place to stay. I said, listen, do you like my place? He liked my place. And I said, how much rent can you afford? He gave me a number, and that number was approximately $300 less than the amount of rent that I was paying for the current lease. I said, listen, if you could just pay that amount that you can afford, would you like to live in my place for the remaining term? He said yes. And so I came up with an arrangement where I would pay the difference between the lease payment and what he could afford, and we're gonna try to work a deal with the landlord. So now I had the second piece of the puzzle to try to get out of this lease early complete, and now I was ready to move on to step number 3. Step number 3 is to enter into a lease amendment with the landlord. So this is the situation. I have the existing lease. I have a new tenant who likes the premises, who can't afford the total lease payment, but can afford a lot of it. And so now we have a situation where we want to enter into an agreement with the landlord that would allow me to pay the difference between the rent paid or the rent owed and the amount that the new tenant could afford, and get that in writing so that I can get out of the lease and not have this huge expense. So what we decided to do was put together a lease amendment. And a lease amendment is basically just a written change to an existing lease agreement. Once I took down the details of the arrangement with the new tenant in the lease amendment, I was ready to approach the landlord. And I did. I went to him and I explained the hardship that I was facing for this particular lease. And I also said I took it upon myself to find a new, quiet tenant who would timely pay the rental payments. And the landlord was taken aback, but he liked the initiative that I displayed by getting that new tenant. All we had to do was do a credit report on the new tenant to make sure that he had the financial wherewithal to make the payments, and then we were ready to go. And I wasn't empty-handed when I approached the landlord. I came with my own written lease amendment, which dictated the details of the deal. You know, the landlord was happy about it because he didn't have to draft his own lease amendment. I had it all down on paper ready for him. He reviewed it and he okayed it, and eventually he signed it. So when the landlord signed the lease amendment, I felt great. I had just traded a huge lease expense for a much smaller one. I had helped a friend move into a new place that he really liked for an affordable price. And now I was free to go out and find another place that was much less expensive. And this was all because of this lease amendment. I spent a lot of time drafting this lease amendment so it could apply to a number of different situations. You could use it if you wanted to get out of a home lease or out of an apartment lease, or also a commercial building lease. If you would like to use the lease amendment that I drafted to get out of your own lease, you can go to iancorzine.com, go to the template store and download it there. Now that we're on the subject of downsizing and saving money, you may have some events in the future that you want to cancel because frankly, you want to get the money, you want to get an online refund and get as much money back as possible because money is tight these days. If you have a need to cancel an event that you were planning on going to, a vacation or a concert like Coachella, something like that, and you want to do it the proper way, the legal way, then you should watch my video right here. And as always, as you watch, I'm going to be at iancorzine.com to answer all your social media law questions.